Start.
We can start. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, welcome everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Frank Veltman as a speaker in this Logic webinar. He is the Professor Emeritus in Logic at the Institute of Logic, Language and Computation of University of Amsterdam. Also, he is affiliated to College of Foreign Languages, Hunan University, Changsha, as a distinguished professor of linguistics. His research interests lie mainly in the logical analysis of natural language, together with the philosophical logic, philosophy of language, and mathematical logic. Today, he is going to give a talk on generics and generality. As always, I would like to encourage you to ask questions during the talk. Frank, it's over to you. Please continue.
Okay, thank you very much, Rubita. So I'm honored to give a talk. It's actually, for me, the first time I give a talk by Zoom, and also the first time I give a talk in India. So that's nice. Thank you very much for the invitation. So generics and generality, let's see what we can do here. So I think the talk is the nicest if you imagine that you believe all these sentences here on this slide, which maybe you don't, but you can. I hope you can imagine people that believe all these sentences are true. And then you start wondering how it can be that you find all these sentences true and these two false. For instance, take birds lay eggs, which I hope you accept. That's take any encyclopedia, that's where a sentence you will find. But you don't believe birds are female, right? Maybe you believe malaria mosquitoes transmit malaria, but you have to realize that only 5% of the female malaria mosquitoes really do so. Still, you believe that, but you don't believe that prime numbers are odd, and there is only one exception to infinitely many ones. Okay? Then elephants live in Africa and India. No elephant lives in Africa and India. And still you believe that elephants live in Africa and India. Okay? That's maybe not such a riddle that you can believe that. Then boys don't cry. The riddle there is not so much that about the number of boys that don't cry, but about the fact that automatically you interpret that as a moral statement, or as it's something a mother says to her son if he starts crying. Boys don't cry, stop. You see, then it's more an order. So how come that you take that as a kind of ethical or moral statement? Okay, so that's the kind of riddles that I want to talk about. And I will not have time to do all of them. I have slides for all of them, but we will see how far we can get. Okay? And there will be other ones when we go along, by the way. But to talk about these things, I have to do that in a certain framework. And maybe, well, I suppose most of you are acquainted with formal semantics, at least for logical languages. And the way you do that then is you give semantics by giving truth conditions. Okay, and you think that, well, the idea is, for instance, take the idea is that you know the meaning of a language if you know its truth conditions. That's how we do this in logic. But I will work in a different framework, and in that framework, you know the meaning of a sentence Oh, this is the wrong slide. Oh, no, that doesn't. Sorry, I have to go back here. You know the meaning of a sentence if you know the change it brings about in the cognitive state of anyone who wants to incorporate the information conveyed by it. So that's a mouthful, but the thing is that the meaning is an operation on a cognitive state, right? Formally, it's a function from cognitive states to cognitive states. And notice that this is a very general definition, and it doesn't work only for declarative sentences or descriptive sentences, but also for questions. If you hear a question, your cognitive state changes. And also for imperatives, if you get a command, you will also change your mind, if you accept it at least, right? And in this framework, it is exactly described how your mind changes by incorporating this new information. And then there are a number of key notions. So instead of truth, is now taken over by a notion of support or acceptance. So, and the idea is that a state supports a sentence if the result of updating that state with the sentence doesn't change the state. So it's already there. That's the idea. The information is already there. So if you hear it, you will not change your mind. And this also works for questions and for commands and everything. Okay, so it's a fixed point in the update operation. That's a very important notion, because then we define logical validity in terms of that notion. And the idea there is, sorry, I don't know why this keeps. The idea there is that an argument is valid if updating any state with the premises yields a state that supports the conclusion. And actually, in this talk, it will play no role, but in general, the order of updating plays a role and can give different outcomes here. So here the idea is when you learn the premises and you accept them, you end up in a state that supports the conclusion, so that you have to accept then the conclusion. Okay, is this idea of the framework okay? Of course, the question is, how do you implement this formally? But these are the ideas behind these formal definitions that we will. I will not give any formal definitions now, but just be sure that this can be formalized. So then this was the framework. Now, if we want to understand the kind of sentences that are central to my talk, we have to talk about a particular epistemic attitude, namely expectations. Logicians and philosophers are quite used to talk about knowledge and belief, but expectation is a bit different, and I think it's much neglected. And here's the claim: there are many grammatical expressions and constructions, the meaning of which one cannot explain without explaining how they affect people's expectations. One example is the word many itself, because many roughly means more than you would expect. And for this talk, one example we need further on is gradable adjectives. Gradable adjectives are adjectives like tall, roughly adjectives that have a comparative. So gradable adjectives are vague. They give imprecise characterizations. That's the standard idea about them. So that's when you say John is tall, you don't know exactly how tall he is, so you can ask that, right? But the point is, these things, these adjectives are also used evaluatively. So when you say somebody says John is 2 meters and 3 centimeters, you will sometimes maybe react by, wow, that's tall. Well, you will never say, wow, that's 2 meters and 3 centimeters. Okay, so, or consider this example. I run 3,000 meters steeplechase in 19 minutes and 58 seconds. Suppose I tell you this. And I am assuming that not many of you know much about steeplechase. So maybe then you wonder, is that fast? Now notice that I told you exactly how fast it is, right? It's 3,000 meters in 90 minutes and 58 seconds. So that's practically the velocity. So you have already the exact velocity, you know that, but still you wonder whether that's fast or not. So why would you want an imprecise description if you already have a precise one? That's the idea. So that's also a function of these words, because this fast there serves as an evaluation of the exact velocity, right? So note that only gradable adjectives can be used in exclamations. So I already gave an example, but you can say, what a tasty dessert you prepared, what a stupid man he is, how tall you are. You cannot say how 2 meters you are, or what a digital watch this is. Digital is not vague, so you see? So the idea is that if you want to explain these evaluativity, then you have to bring in expectations. So roughly, how do weak evaluativities like tall get their evaluative force? Tall roughly means taller than you would expect. And unless you have evidence to the contrary, you expect somebody to be neither tall nor short. That's the normal case. So the idea is you only use words like tall and short if the situation is not normal. And if the situation is normal, you don't use these words, right? Of course, these words are also context dependent, but I'm now not paying attention to that. Yeah, that's not relevant now. Then I say here, how do weak evaluatives like tall get the evaluative force? There's a difference between weak evaluatives and strong ones, which is not important for the talk, but tall is weak and strong is something like tasty and beautiful. These are strong evaluatives. They differ in semantic behavior, but that's not for this talk. So expectations also have two sides, which is also important for the things I'm going to talk about. So they can be both normative and epistemic. So when I say, I expect you to be at home before midnight well, my son is now too old to say it to him, but I used to say that when he was still young. That sounds like an order. And when I say we expect a lot of rain this week, that's just an epistemic statement, right? Somehow. And I want you to notice that there is much overlap between the vocabulary for normative and for epistemic expectations. For instance, words like must and may are used in both epistemic and normatively. Like, that must be the milkman, he always rings twice. That's epistemic. And you must believe me no matter what the people might say. That's normative, right? And what I want you to wonder about is how you automatically are able to interpret it one way or the other. That's kind of a riddle um, that well, that I think a lot about. But that's also a riddle that I'm not going to talk about. You can ask me questions about that if you want in the discussion time. So now are we ready to look a bit at generics? So far, everything clear? Because now we're coming to the real thing. And this is the basic idea. So if an agent accepts a sentence of the form P's are Q, so all these sentences that we saw, then every time, she is confronted with an object with the property P, she will expect that X has the property Q rather than the property not Q. Okay, that's the idea. And expect unless there is good reason not to do so. I have to add that as we will. I will give you an example but here's the idea. So if you have learned that tigers are orange with black stripes, and I tell you Shere Khan is a tiger, then you will expect that Shere Khan is orange with black stripes. You would say, presumably Shere Khan is orange with black stripes. The thing is, this is an example. Shere Khan, maybe you know, is a tiger from Jungle Book, from Kipling's book, Jungle Book. Nowhere in the book anything is said about Shere Khan's colors. But if you know the book, if you read it, then I'm sure you assumed that he was orange with black stripes. So that's how it works. The thing is, it's possible that Shere Khan is a Bengal tiger, and if you were to learn that, then you would give up this idea that he is orange with black stripes. Okay? So the point is that you are only allowed to draw this conclusion that presumably Shere Khan is orange with black stripes if these are the only things you know about Shere Khan. It's the only thing you know about Shere Khan, that he's a tiger, and the only thing you know about tigers is that they're orange with black stripes. Well, then maybe you know other things, but basically, if this is your only information, then you can draw the conclusion. And it might be that if you learn more about Shere Khan, you have to withdraw that conclusion. So the notion of validity that plays a role here is not the notion that I mentioned before, but it's called default validity or minimal validity. So an argument is valid if updating the minimal state with the premises, so the state in which you know nothing or nothing relevant, for the case, the minimal state with the premises that yields a state that supports the conclusion. Okay. And now, yeah. If an object is exception, so the idea is that generic sentences express default rules. So rules with exceptions. Tigers are orange with white stripes. There are exceptions to that rule. People have 2 legs. There are exceptions to that rule. Okay? But usually, if you don't have no information that you might have to do with an exception, you will assume it's not an exception and therefore draw the conclusion that will the object will have the property concerned. So here's this example I will explain in detail, and I will try to explain to you the formalities a bit more. So, oh, these are strange numbers here. Sorry about that. So suppose you accept these premises. Adults have a bank account. Adults have a driver's license. John is an adult. But by accident, John doesn't have a bank account. Okay? Then still, you will assume that John has a driver's license. I hope you agree. That's how, if an object is exceptional in one respect, it doesn't mean it will be exceptional in other respects. Okay? So now I will explain more how this works in the formal framework, but I will explain it by drawing, and then I hope you can see how these how you could. I hope you can put these drawings in formal set theoretic definitions yourself, or look at the paper and then see how it works. But basically, to deal with the examples, what you need is there are 4 kinds of objects. Adults that, so the letter A here means adult, the letter B here means bank account, has a bank account, the letter D means has a driver's license. That's when they're in black. And when they're in red, it means they don't have a bank account and don't have a driver's license. So there are 4 types of objects: adults with a bank account and a driver's license, adults with a driver's license without a bank account, adults with neither, and adults with a bank account and no driver's license. Okay? Now, suppose this is, you know, you're dealing with these kinds of objects. Then I tell you that adults normally have a bank account. Then what you will, this is how your state of mind will change. So here are the adults that have a bank account, and you prefer these to the adults that don't have a bank account. So in this picture, the things to the left are more in the line of your expectations than the things on the right. Okay? So you prefer adults that do have a bank account to adults that don't have a bank account. Now you learn, second premise, adults have a driver's license. Then this is how your mind changes. You get a different expectation pattern, as it is called. Most in the line of your expectations are adults that have both. Least in the line of your expectations are adults that have neither a bank account nor a driver's license, and these are sort of in between. Okay? Now, if you, for an arbitrary adult, so if you learn in this situation, if you learn in this situation, you meet John, you will assume that he has both. Now, if he is an adult, so if you now learn John is an adult, you will assume that he has both a bank account and a driver's license. But now, if I tell you John doesn't have a bank account, he's an exception to one of these rules, then this is how you will change your mind. These possibilities are not real possibilities anymore. So these are the only possibilities you have to reckon with then. And then the most in line with you, so the ones you have to reckon with are within this triangle. And then the one most in line with your expectations is, of course, is that John is an adult without a bank account, as you know, but with a driver's license. So you see how this goes? Presumably, with the information, you are here. So what you now saw in this example is that the logic is not monotonic. Yeah, because, well, at first, if you only have these two rules, then and you learn that John is an adult, you will assume that he has both a bank account and a driver's license. And then if you learn that he's an exception to one of these rules, you will drop this supposition that that he has a bank account, but still believe that he has a driver's license. Okay. So now let me explain that this is enough to understand that birds lay eggs does not imply birds are female. And to understand that, so this is the minimal state. Now I tell you two things. Birds lay eggs, and this is a strict rule. Only female animals can lay eggs. Okay, so suppose you know that too. Okay, the thing is, if you have this as a strict rule, there will not, you only have three types of object. Three types of birds. Birds that lay eggs and are female, birds that don't lay eggs and are female, birds that don't lay eggs and are not female. Those are the, given this rule, only female animals can lay eggs. As a strict rule, so that it's necessary for a female, for that if something lays eggs that it's female, then you, these are the, in principle, you have three kinds of objects. And then if you also learn that birds lay eggs, this is your preference pattern. Okay, but from this, it doesn't follow that birds are female, because for that to be the case, you have to prefer female to non-females, and you don't do that in this here. You don't prefer a female to a not female. So if you learn birds are female, then this will change to this. In this picture, you prefer females to non-females. So, but given, so in this situation where you accept birds lay eggs, you don't accept that birds are female. And given our definition of validity, so it doesn't follow from birds lay eggs that birds are female. Okay? You still there?
Yes, we are here.
Okay. Yeah, this thing, I have to make you disappear to be able to. So then, why aren't all generic sentences equally general? So compare birds can fly and birds lay eggs. Okay. And here's the thing. What I will now explain is that if you learn that something is a bird, you will assume that it can fly, unless you're told something else, right? But if in this situation you accept all except birds lay eggs, but if I tell you that Tweety is a bird, you will not assume that it will presumably lay eggs, right? So I will explain how that comes about now. And for that, I have to explain what systematic exceptions are. So this is actually of course, the standard example in non-monotonic logic, and there are many, many frameworks in which explain why this is a valid argument, and why you, in this situation, prefer to the conclusion that Tweety is a bird that cannot fly, rather than the conclusion that Tweety is a bird that can fly. So But let me talk about it as if you've never seen this example before. So suppose you accept birds can fly. Penguins are a kind of birds. That's not a default rule, but all penguins are birds. There's no exception to that. No penguin can fly. Actually, I will assume that this is also a strict rule that makes things simpler to explain. But the example wouldn't change much. Well, the explanation would, but the validity wouldn't change if that was a default rule. And then, so suppose you accept these three rules, and then you learn that Tweety is a penguin. Why don't you conclude that? Why do you conclude that Tweety can fly rather than cannot fly rather than that Tweety can fly? Because, well, on the face of it, both conclusions are possible. Okay. Well, this is easy to explain in the theory, as far as I told you. The point is that we are dealing with three kinds of birds in this example, namely birds that are not penguins and that can fly, birds that are not penguins and that cannot fly, birds that are penguins and that cannot fly. Right? And the fourth kind that is excluded by the rule that no penguin can fly. Okay. So there are no penguins that can fly in this picture. And then the thing is, so these are the rules. And then about Tweety, you know this. You know Tweety is a penguin. So you know birds can fly. That means these objects are preferred to these. You know penguins are a kind of bird. Well, that's in the picture. If something is a penguin, then it's a bird. No penguin can fly. There's no penguin in the picture that can fly. Tweety is a penguin, and then you know you're here. Okay, and you see, this is what you know. Tweety is a penguin, and then you draw the conclusion that Tweety cannot fly. Okay. Now I'm going to change this example a little bit. The case is the same, but now the agent does not know that Tweety is a penguin. Instead, she believes that Tweety may be a penguin. So imagine that. So I tell you, okay. Will you, in that situation, also conclude that Tweety cannot fly? So this is depends. So I think you will not conclude in this situation that Tweety cannot fly. And the idea is, so we have now to talk about the meaning of may. So, and may indicates that the agent must reckon with the possibility that Tweety is a penguin. So this is what this my theory of may, well, actually not only my theory of may, but also my theory of may works is. Now, what may does, may expresses a likely possibility, something to reckon with, something that is consistent with your expectations. And might is it's also a possibility, but an unlikely possibility, consistent with everything you know, but maybe not in line with what you expect. Yeah, so may is stronger than might. Well, to this I just mentioned here because I'm not the only one thinking this. This is a very famous descriptive linguist, not a formal linguist, formal semantics, but the descriptive. So the effect of the hypothetical auxiliary might, with its implication contrary to expectation, right, is to make the expression of possible more tentative and guarded. And may is not contrary to expectation.
Frank,
Yeah.
I had a small question. Like, is it possible to say that Tweety may loses its wings for due to some accident? It's a bird, cannot fly. So it may happen that there is some problem with the wings, so it cannot fly. Maybe it's a crow or a parrot or.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so that's why that may occurs in that case, like when we are concluding that a tweet is a bird, cannot fly, it may happen that it is a penguin or.
Yeah, so in this case, so I have the example that, so the example is that you have the same rules as in the first example, but then in this example, somehow, I don't know why, but somehow you have to reckon with the possibility that it's a penguin. Suppose you are in a country, you are in the deep south of America, or you are in a zoo, or you are, or somebody tells you about he has been to the zoo and saw this bird, and then you have to reckon with the possibility. Of course, in most circumstances, if I don't tell, in most circumstances, it is consistent with your knowledge that so there's a difference between here, if you here have get Tweety might be a penguin, you cannot exclude the possibility, but that will not, in that situation, you will not withdraw, you will not give up this idea that presumably Tweety can fly. Okay. But then I say, no, you have to reckon with the possibility that it's the penguin. Actually, so what matters is whether you have to reckon with the possibility or not. Whether it's a possibility, but one that you don't have to reckon with. Like, okay, there is a possibility you win the lottery, but you don't reckon with that possibility when you make holiday plans, right, or something. You see? So that's the important. Then that's the important thing. Then the second point is, and there's much more discussion about that. Is it really true that when you have to reckon with the possibility, we use may, and when you don't have to reckon with the possibility, we use might? There's a lot to say about that, but there's also been psychological experiments. So people have done, and then it turns out that people really think, well, most people think may is stronger than might, or that this is something that appears from those investigations. Okay? So, but the question now is, if you agree with this, that in this situation, you will not conclude that Tweety can fly. So you don't know for sure that's a penguin, but it may be a penguin. Then you will not dare to conclude that it can fly. If you agree with that, then I can explain why, from this premise, birds lay eggs, and Tweety is a bird, you will not conclude that Tweety will lay eggs. So this is the picture that we had. So you have to reckon with this possibility. And here's the reason. Because so we are doing non-monotonic logic, and the point is, you accept a lot more than just that birds lay eggs. This is what you accept. Birds lay eggs. Male birds are birds, just like penguins are birds. No male bird can lay eggs. just like no penguin can fly. Tweety is a bird, and you have to reckon with the possibility that Tweety may be a male bird. That's a possibility you have to reckon with. It's not, you cannot neglect that possibility. So you see, how am I doing time-wise actually? Okay. So that's the same idea. And so that's so the thing why non-monotonicity differs so much, non-monotonic logic differs so much from ordinary logic, because when you have to, you always have to keep in mind that when you judge, you have to intuitively judge whether an argument is valid or invalid. It often is the case that you know much more than what the premises say, and that may play a role in whether you can conclude something or not conclude something. So if it really were the case that the only thing you know is that birds lay eggs and Tweety is a bird, and imagine when you were a child, maybe that is the situation you were in at some point, that all you knew about birds is that they lay eggs and you didn't know about that male birds didn't. You have maybe been in that situation. In that situation, you would have concluded that Tweety lays eggs. If this is really all you know. But given that you know basically so much more, you will not draw that conclusion anymore. So now we may wonder about the question, so is birds lay eggs true? A true sentence. And I want to point out that this example that I just gave shows that you cannot judge the acceptability of a generic sentence in isolation. The rule birds lay eggs is acceptable despite the fact that at least half of all birds never lay an egg, because we know so many other things about birds and about laying eggs, all of which play a role when we reason about particular birds. All these rules taken together enforce that the rule birds lay eggs only applies in cases in which we are dealing with female birds. Okay, so you cannot give a truth value to this sentence, birds lay eggs in is isolation. You can only say it's true if given that there's also all these other sentences. So it's not that in this theory you can compositionally give a truth condition, assign truth values compositionally to sentences. You have to do something else. But then the question arises, when so far I only showed you how the logic works, and that's something that plays a role once you have accepted generic sentences, right? I didn't talk so far about when you should accept or not accept a generic sentence, and that is an important topic, and it's especially important because, well, all our prejudices are expressed in generic statements. So then the question is, how can you criticize prejudice? And so generic statements seem to be immune to counterexamples, right? They're just exceptions, people say, that prove the rule. That's their default rule. So there are exceptions, and so remember, recall Donald Trump about Mexican immigrants saying they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. So if you want to fight Trump here, what are you going to do? You cannot simply point at a Mexican immigrant that's not a rapist or a criminal, or because he would say, oh, no, that's an exception to the rule, and then. Okay, so here is my ideas about this. The point is, when you accept that a rule, a sentence of the form P's have the property Q, what you think is that this is a special kind of property, that it is an intrinsic property, an essential property of the kind in question. And so the rule is supposed to specify an essential, an innate property of the kind of object at issue. That's how this kind is created, designed, educated, whatever. And for exceptions, if you give an exception to somebody who believes a certain generic statement, then maybe your opponent can explain that counterexample away. He or she can explain how this particular object has become an exception. And here let me, I will now spend some time explaining these things. I'm aware that what I said so far about this is not very clear, but I hope it will become clear in a minute. First, about this idea that all these rules are essential. I took here some things from the internet. Generosity is in our blood, and that's what makes me proud to be an Australian. Women love shopping. It's in their bones. The Greeks have politics in their DNA. This is nowadays the way to put these things. People used to say it's in their blood, but nowadays they say it's in their DNA. So the Greeks have politics in their DNA. Their experience goes back for more than 2,500 years. Don't blame men for looking at other women. It's in their genes. You see? So this is, I gave these examples here just to make the point that when you believe, when you use a generic statement, you're also always thinking of some kind of essential property. Of course, in the case of biology, this is perfectly fine. And that's also why in biology, you have so many generic statements, right? Because there you can make a difference between essential properties and accidental properties. But whether you can do that all over the place, that's another point. Okay. So let me tell you now how this works. So this is fine if you believe human beings have two legs. That's an acceptable statement, because if I point at somebody and say, oh, listen, this man has only one leg, probably you can explain how that this man has become an exception to the rule. You can point at a certain accident or what else that has made this person an exception to the rule. Imagine the other way around. Suppose I said human beings have one leg. That's the generic statement that I believe. And that you point at somebody with two legs. Then it's much more difficult, right? How can you explain that by what accident this man has gotten two legs rather than the normal one? I'm going to lose that, right? There is no such story for me to tell. You see? So that's the idea. And that's, well, let's skip this for the sake of time. That's how you can explain this, why prime numbers are odd is unacceptable. There is an exception to the rule, but it's not by accident. 2 is an exception to the rule that prime numbers are odd, but you cannot point at an accident that 2 that actually originally was also odd has become even, right? There is no such story, so it's necessarily even, and therefore oddness is not an essential property of prime numbers. Well, so then how can you, yeah, well, this is, let me skip this and go to this example, boys don't cry. Actually, I have no real good, I wish I had a very good explanation of how this thing could become normative rather than descriptive. But remember that expectations can be used both normatively and descriptively, right? And so when you say boys don't cry, you say I expect that whenever I see a boy that he will not cry. And then it doesn't matter so much whether that's epistemic or deontic, right? The reason that's typical, by the way, that when we do these normative thing, it's always with negative sentences. So friends, don't let friends drive drunk. That's when you also give a normative interpretation rather than an epistemic interpretation. Or mothers, don't jump off buildings. I give this example because you might think that these are sort of things you have to, this is because this is a new sentence for most of you, I suppose, and still I hope you will interpret that normatively immediately rather than epistemically. And I think the way to explain that is that you sort of see immediately that epistemically they are not acceptable, and therefore you interpret them normatively. That's the best explanation I can give of how this works, and maybe some of you have better ideas about this. So this is really, well, actually now my talk is turning more into a talk about prejudice than a talk about generic sentences. But so the real danger is that if you say A's are normally B, take the sentence, for instance, human beings are normally heterosexual. That's very, very fine sentence if it's epistemically right. But then if this epistemic expectation becomes a normative expectation, then things go wrong, right? If you say people are normally heterosexual, therefore there's something wrong, and so forth. This is a pattern, a thought pattern that you often see. And it's the bad thing is that's kind of built-in natural language. Here is the point is that our distant ancestors made no difference between normative laws and descriptive laws. Both were imposed by the gods, the first on human beings and the second on nature. Even Galileo thought so. So I'm here quoting Galileo. The Holy Writ and nature both originate in the divine word, the former as a dictation of the the former as a dictation of the Holy Ghost, and the latter as an executor of God's orders. See that? So this is a rather primitive way of thinking, but it looks like it's built in the way natural language works. So generic statements work that way, that it's not clear often whether it's descriptive or normative, and actually their logic is much like the logic of deontic statements. Maybe I have time to do one more example, and that's the malaria. Mosquitoes transmit malaria. Actually, I'm going to convince you that this is false. You should not accept this. This is prejudice. But this is not. So first I want to point out that for generic sentences, it is a difference whether you take the active or the passive. So beavers build dams is true, is acceptable, but dams are built by beavers is not. So when you agree? And this is easy to explain in my theory, because for beavers, you prefer beavers that build dams to beavers that don't build dams. But for dams, you don't prefer dams are built by beavers to dams that are built not by beavers. That's fine. So there's also, I think, a difference between malaria is transmitted by malaria mosquitoes, which is fine, and malaria mosquitoes transmit malaria. So you can accept this without accepting this for the same reason, that it's logically not the same. But then it's fine to accept this in my book, but not fine to accept this. And the reason is that it's here. So only certain species of mosquitoes of the Anopheles genus and only females of the species can transmit malaria. But then the thing is that the females that do so, they have the parasite, but only by accident. It's like the females are also infected, right? So it's by accident that these females do this. It's not an essential property. And the thing is, if you accept this sentence, that is a gateway to accepting lots and lots and lots and lots of prejudice that you never want to accept. Because say, well, I'm not going to you can think of the examples yourself where you have exactly the same situation as I write here, and where you never would accept the generic statement in question. So roughly, this is a conclusion. So it's possible to give a uniform account of the logical properties of generic sentences. And I hope to have, well, I just gave an indication of that. I hope I could convince you that behind these pictures, there is a real formal theory, and that this theory can very good explain the logical properties of these sentences. But then this account does not bring us much closer to an answer to the question of what the truth, or better maybe their acceptance conditions are, about when you should accept such a sentence. And so I only hope to make start by talking about these difference between intrinsic and accidental properties and so forth. So I couldn't do the example about that Indians are good cricket players. There you need more the notion of presupposition. And I also didn't do the example about elephants. But that's actually an easy example. But okay, thank you. This is about what I had to say, and I think it's now 3 minutes already past time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frank, for such a lucid talk. Is there any question? Yeah, sir, I think you have some question, right?
Yes, it was an excellent eye-opener to me. Thank you very much. I want to just ask you one. I mean, I would have been happy if you could give some examples for imperatives also. You mentioned that imperatives are also, I mean, and do also fall within this. I mean, within this discussion. And,
yeah, I first offered. Well, I also offered to talk about imperatives rather than this topic. So imperatives, the way they work is that your question, by the way, that I should?
No, my question is this: that for imperatives, you might be knowing Brana's work with two types of. I mean, instead of truth and falsehood, he uses acceptance and violation.
Okay.
So his entire discussion is based on these two notions, acceptance and violation.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a little bit of that, but so I was expecting how imperatives fit in your categories.
Okay, so in this framework, well, the way I do it, actually, there are other people who do it differently. But I will explain. So there's two ways to approach this. One, the way I do it is as follows: if you accept a command or an imperative, what will change is your plans. So if you tell me, do the dishes, I say, okay, I will do that. Then when I accept it, I make it my plan to do the dishes. So this is how I explain things.
Yeah.
And so I have then in the formal structures, I have something called plans. Other people do it much more like I do these defaults, actually. So they also refer to my work on defaults, but they update then a preference relation.
Mm-hmm.
So if you give me a command, then I will prefer worlds, and I accept that, then I will prefer worlds in which this command has been carried out to worlds in which it has not been carried out. You see, and that's a different approach. Well, that also works nice, but yeah, so there's two ways in which these imperatives are dealt with in this framework, and there's lots of discussion between them. Well, actually, there should be much discussion. There isn't much discussion, but there should be. But it works better. These both work much better than giving truth values to imperatives. For one thing, one big problem with imperatives is free choice.
Mm-hmm.
Things like when they say do this or that, then you can choose. and say that from do this, it doesn't follow do this or do that. And both theories can explain all these things with easily. So all the problems that you get with imperatives, if you assign truth values to them, are solved within both approaches. Is this a good answer, or?
Yeah, I'm quite satisfied with this. I would only ask you whether you have seen Brana's work in the connection of imperatives.
No, I'm afraid I don't know it, or I forgot it. Because it's actually the I worked on imperatives. It's long ago that I did all this work on imperatives. I'm planning to take it up again, and in that time I tried to read everything, but I'm not sure I did. And I will take a look at it and see how it relates to my idea.
Well, so what will be your general opinion about the whole lot of non-monotonic logics that have developed in this Tweety example paradigm?
So
your opinion. I want your opinion. I mean, if you want.
Well, so there is a lot ad hoc stuff there, but basically, I think that non-monotonic logic that it's a pity that it's now so. I think it's the biggest invention in logic of the last 40 years. But there is not all of the work that's done there is equally interesting or good. And it's yeah, what can I say? I think so. Circumscription is a very nice framework, I personally think. I'm not so happy with all these things in which you have to find fixed points, because I don't find that very natural. And so well, let me put it this way. Sorry, I'm not giving a straightforward answer. That's because I'm thinking while I'm talking. But I think I should put it this way.
Okay.
I think that intuitively, the intuitions behind all these systems of non-monotonic logic are roughly the same. And this is very important, but the question how to turn these intuitions into a workable and elegant and nice formal framework, that's still there's still a problem, that how to formalize things properly. But I think it's very, very important that we keep looking for the most elegant formalization of those intuitions. And then my personal opinion is that I only find out that I don't like the systems that use fixed points, because I think that's not cognitively realistic. But and then I like circumscription. I think that's a nice way, but there you have problems with priorities. So that's yeah. I also prefer systems where you don't have to impose. So in my system, I think that's one of the good points of my system. Priorities, so like that you prefer when you that when you have these two defaults, birds can fly and penguins cannot fly, and then you learn that Tweety is a penguin, that you will prefer the rules that penguins cannot fly to the rule that birds can fly. You don't have to impose that on the system. This is sort of automatically coming out, right? And other priority things are automatically coming out. You don't have special priority rules. Whereas in many systems, the first systems like writer system and so forth, you had to impose these priority rules. And it is as a logician or as a programmer, you can sort of choose what you give priority. Whereas I think the priorities are built in. It's not up to us to say, okay, the rule birds can fly, penguins can fly, has priority to the rules birds can fly. It's not us who take the decision. It's the language who has taken that decision for us, given what these words mean. And that's a good property of my system, is that that's how things work out. Whereas in, say, a writer system or some other systems, you have to impose these rules on top of what else you have. But okay, but I'm not saying that my system is ideal. Also because it's the expressive power is very small. It's only about generic statements. About it's a very simple language and a very simple thing.
Thank you.
But yeah, so there's still a lot of work to do, but I think it's a very important topic. It still is, also, even if it's out of fashion now.
I just wanted to mention that these entrenchment orderings are everywhere. Like, so this entrenchment orderings, you were talking about priorities in the non-monotonic systems that are kind of built in. So not meaning that are kind of forced to on. So this entrenchment orderings, like the works of Mackinson systems and these systems, there are these systems, non-monotonic systems, where these entrenchment orderings.
Oh yeah.
They're also there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see that. Yeah. So that's also principled, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. As long as there's it's principled and not ad hoc. Yeah. But yeah, it has it's out of fashion, I think, because everybody is doing statistics now.
Yeah, learning and statistics.
Yeah.
So is there any more question? Okay. So if not, then I just want to give you thanks again, Frank, for such a nice talk. And of course, I learned from this talk a lot, like I did in ILLC as well, when you taught the philosophical logic as usual. And yeah, so I hope that if some of you have some more questions, you may ask Frank directly by email. Is it so, Frank? They can, right?
Sorry?
No, I'm just asking that if someone has some questions, they may.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm closing that session for today. So now we may the platform. Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Well, thank you very much for listening to me.
It was really nice.
Oh, no, well, I'm not so sure. I think, but that's my own problem.
At least to me.
At a certain point, I forgot. My English was not so good at some point. I couldn't find the right words, but okay, that's my problem. I'm happy to hear that you could understand it.